Hello everyone, it's Bound here. Welcome back to another video. Now today I'm going to be explaining the main team that I built for Regulation I in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now as you may know, Regulation I allows you to use 2 restricted legendaries on a team. And for this team I decided to use Miraidon plus Ho, and the reason why I decided to use these two is because of their offensive and defensive capabilities and just their compatibility with each other. And the remaining 4 Pokemon I decided to use were Pao, Primarina, Scizor, and Ursaluna. And I'm going to be diving into the reasons why I chose these Pokemon, why I decided to pick them at the end, why I decided to use a certain sets that I have on them, and just general thoughts about the regulation as a whole. So I'm going to be getting into the Showdown Team Builder, kind of going through the EV spreads and talking about the moves and everything. Alright, welcome to the Pokemon Showdown Team Builder. This is the team that I have in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for Regulation I at the moment. Miraidon, Ho, Pao, Primarina, Scizor, and Ursaluna Bloodmoon. So basically, I want to just talk about how I conceptualized the team and just how I arrived at these 6 Pokemon and their movesets currently. So basically, I started the team off with Choice Band Ho, and the reason why I decided to do that is I was looking at, what are the top used legendaries? The 3 top used legendaries were always Calyrex Shadow, Koraidon, and Miraidon, right? So I was like, okay, maybe I could just use Ho to deal with those Pokemon, but I didn't know how to build it to actually take advantage of Ho's options, right? Because those Pokemon have all these Pokemon have high damage options. They have pivoting moves. They have status moves that can be very threatening. So I was like, how could I deal with all these Pokemon just very easily without having to deal with guessing a lot? So I think Ho was the best option, and Choice Band, I decided to go with the Choice Band here. Just because of how the meta is. So currently in the meta, there's a lot of walls being used as well. So you have things like Dondozo, Tinglu, Garganical, and other walls that are very hard to take down. That's basically what I kind of wanted to approach the game with, either a Choice Band or a Choice Specs legendary Pokemon, and just kind of build a team around that. And so, yeah, I decided to go with the Choice Band on Ho. And as for the Terra type, I chose Ground mainly because of preventing Volt Switch on Miraidon, right? So Miraidon can sometimes be very annoying when it's Volt Switching around and pivoting around. And since a lot more Miraidons run Volt Switch than U-Turn, I decided to just run Ground Terra to try and cancel that out outright and just kill it with Earthquake. Now, the main thing about this is a lot of Ho. Currently, the most used Terra type on Ho is Fairy. So that means a lot of Miraidons, I conceptualized that a lot of Miraidons would go for Volt Switch against Ho or Electro Drift. Now, this wasn't always the case. A lot of Miraidons did go for Draco Meteor immediately, or just some other option, or even U-Turn. But mainly, it was still my plan was still basically able to work a lot of the time because a lot of people just expect Fairy Terra just because it is the default option, and so I was able to get really good early advantages, and I kind of come to the conclusion that in Regulation I, getting an early advantage is so good in the regulation. So just maintaining an advantage over your opponent is a really good way to just ensure consistency in the battle. And by blowing your Terra turn 1, I think it is kind of risky, but at the same time, I think it is sufficient enough in this metagame. So the other moves I decided to run are Sacred Fire, which is the main move that Ho usually runs. It can, get a 50% chance to burn. Obviously, that's very strong. So it can, for example, hit Calyrex Shadow down to its Focus Sash range, and then Bird can kill it. So that's one example. Another one is Focus Sash Pao. And just spreading burns on bulkier Pokemon can offset their leftovers recovery, which is very important. So this very strong move. The only downside to it is that it can miss. Obviously, if you have seen any of my streams, I've missed a lot of Sacred Fires, unfortunately, but that's just something you have to sign up. You've signed up for when you're using legendary Pokemon. They have the PP of the move is that high, which is another thing, and then the accuracy will not always be 100. Now you have things like Astral Barrage, which I don't think should be 100 accuracy, but that's a discussion for another video maybe. But yeah, it is out there, but unfortunately Sacred Fire does not have 100% accuracy, so I kind of had to deal with that. And Brave Bird is obviously the flying stab that Ho usually runs. Especially with the Choice Band, I really prioritize breaking power, especially against the opponent's Ho as well, because a lot of Ho's currently in the metagame are running HP and defense, so by running Brave Bird, that thing can't switch in, and they're just going to get 2 KO'd. So That was really good. It worked out a lot. You might have seen that in some of my shorts, YouTube short clips. You know, Brave just breaking down the opponent's team very easily because a lot of teams just don't have the best switches to flying moves at the moment. And so it was really effective, right? It was really fun. So the last move I decided to run on this was Dual Wing Beat. Now, Dual Wing Beat, as you may know, is a double hitting move and multi-hit move. So this allows me to KO through Sash Pokemon in one turn, such as Fluttermane, Breloom, and Sneasler. So I can get, you know, immediate kills without having to worry about those Pokemon getting a second chance to move, and I can just, you know, continue on with the match. And with the current EV spread I have, so currently my EV spread is 252 HP, just to prioritize the one-on-one matchup survival, and then 136 or 156 attack, which puts my attack at, you know, that magic on a multiple of 11, which is important for damage calculations, and also the adamant nature, you know, boosting it. And then speed, you know, 100 speed allows it to get 123. You know, the value is 123, which means it outspeeds the fastest adamant Sash Breloom, which is important. So most Brelooms run an adamant nature, so by outspeeding the Sash, I can just outspeed with the Wing Beat, which is really important because Breloom is obviously, a lot of people just use Breloom no matter what. Like, even though I have a Miraidon on the team, which blocks out Spore, people still use Breloom. So that's pretty much the breakdown of Ho, and obviously against, you know, things like Calyrex Shadow and Koraidon, Brave Bird and Sacred Fire are, you know, Brave Bird, very good option. Can pretty much one-hit KO those Pokemon. Sacred Fire is really good against Calyrex Shadow, obviously, since it can just even burn it through a Sash or something like that, so that's really strong. And so yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to go for with this team, and it was really fun. Oh yeah, obviously this ability is Regenerator, by the way. I did not run Pressure. So yeah. So Miraidon is the next Pokemon that I decided to put on the team, and mainly the reason behind that is just because Ho's biggest problem in terms of the legendaries was Kyogre. And Miraidon with the Assault Vest is really good against Kyogre. It's probably one of the best counters to Kyogre because, one, it immunes Thunder Wave, which is something that Kyogres have been using a lot recently, and also it just resists the Water Stab that Kyogres throw out against Ho. Obviously, Ho being weak to water before and after Terra is not, you know, optimal for it, so that's why I decided to use this Miraidon here. And it's also just good, yeah, like I said, it's also really good that it cannot get paralyzed in general, and so it just has really good options. And the moveset I decided to run was Electro Drift, Draco Meteor, Miracle, and U-Turn. And the EV spread I ran was, you know, the HP and special defense investment allows me to, you know, live 2 specs Astral Barrages from Calyrex Shadow. Not always, but it has a pretty high chance of, you know, living those options, those Astral Barrages. And then 60 speed, which gives me the upper hand on around the high base 90s, I think, Pokemon, like Urshifu. So around could potentially, you know, outspeed the Jolly Urshifu. And then 76 special attack, just the remainder of the EVs when it's a special attack and defense. And so that's really good. However, the main thing that I want to talk about here is Miracle and U-Turn, because these aren't really common moves you'll see on Miraidon. However, they work really well with the Assault Vest item. So Miracle obviously, you know, deals back double damage from the opponent's special attack. So this was really useful against Kyogre and Terrapagos, because a lot of Terrapagos will use Terra against Miraidon and use Terra Starstorm, which means it kind of opens itself up to a lot of damage from Miracle, because the reason why they Terra against Miraidon is because Terrapagos' Terra removes the terrains from the field. It also removes weather, but mainly the terrain, right? So Miraidon can't really do much with Electro Drift, you know, after that happens, and then so that's why I ran Miracle, and it worked a lot in a lot of situations. And also against Kyogre, I really didn't like guessing the Terra, so I kind of just threw a lot of Miracles and they worked, especially against Fairy Terra, because you can throw out a Draco Meteor predicting like a ground or electric, but then if they go Fairy, then you just lost a turn. Same thing with Electro Drift, if they go ground, you just lost a turn. So I think Miracle is a really good mid-ground option that, yeah, helped in a lot of situations. It also helped against Miraidon as well, opposes Miraidon, because obviously, you know, if it's specs, so, you know, in the early months of Regulation I, a lot of Miraidons ran specs, obviously, was obviously influenced by the #1 team of Season 30 using specs Miraidon. but after that, Specs Miraidon kind of dropped off, and so Mirror Coat was able to, I was able to survive most hits from Miraidon to just kill them with Mirror Coat, and so that was really strong. And then U-turn is obviously really good because if Ting Lu comes in on like a Draco Meteor or E-Drift, I could just U-turn out and just kind of conserve the Miraidon's HP because, Ting Lu is a very defensive very bulky Pokemon, and so any damage I can get is really helpful. And so, by actually damaging it and switching out, I thought it was really good. And also, it was a really good option against Ho-Oh as well, because opponents Ho-Oh, because sometimes they would be ground Terra, and so throwing out a U-turn was really strong against the opponent's Ho-Oh lead if I led Miraidon, and then bringing in my own Ho-Oh because usually the opponent's Ho-Oh would just go for like an Earthquake against Miraidon or Sacred Fire or something like that. So that's where these two kind of really worked well together. I was able to just get so much offensive momentum because this is a offensive cycle-based team where you have, Pokemon that benefit off of cycling and then just the high power to deal with opponents' Pokemon. So that was kind of the, the concept behind the two legendaries. So it had good matchups versus most of the legendaries, but now I was a little concerned because then the general, team slots such as Chien-Pao, Fluttermane, Ting Lu were still kind of problematic. So I kind of wanted to, build, the remaining 4 Pokemon to deal with them. Now, Urshifu Water was also a very problematic Pokemon, especially with Ho-Oh running a Terra Ground Terra, so it's weak to water moves before and after Terra. So that's why I mainly decided to run the Rocky Helmet Primarina. Now, this Primarina can also resist Koraidon's option, so I ran HP and defense here. Max HP, max defense with the Bold Nature, just to have as much survivability as possible against those Pokemon, because especially against Bandit or Shifu, you want to be able to, withstand 2 rounds of Surging Strikes or just 2 close combat, so that's really important that I did that. And so, originally I ran the Taunt ability with Sparkling Aria instead of Psychic Noise, which actually was kind of funny because it actually won me a game because Sparkling Aria cured the opponent's Urshifu, or the Ursaluna, which had a Flame Orb. It cured their burn, so it did less damage after, which is kind of funny. But overall, I decided that changing to Liquid Voice and using Psychic Noise was better just because of the Gliscor increase. Just because, with Terra Steel Gliscor being so common, I didn't really get too much mileage out of Primarina in that sense, so Psychic Noise just allowed me to at least manage the HP better, because a lot of the times Gliscor, especially since Gliscor was paired with Dondozo and, other bulky Pokemon, Psychic Noise was just a generally good option versus defensive teams, and so this allowed me to just gain more momentum that way. And the Rocky Helmet's obviously really good at, damaging Choice Band or Shifu, Choice Scarf for Shifu, and Koraidon even more, which can potentially put it in range of the Sucker Punch from Chien-Pao, which is, one of my concepts for dealing with those Pokemon. And so, and then Moonblast, obviously a really good Fairy Stab option, so able to, one-shot Koraidon if Terra is off the table, and just, good against dragons, good against fighting types, and, things that my other Pokemon don't like. And then Flip Turn is obviously a really good way to gain more momentum, especially, like I said, against Urshifu, because if you switch it to a Surging Strikes, and then he gets Rocky Helmeted down to around 51% HP or 50%, and then Flip Turn basically makes it so that he has to switch out or he dies anyway, because he's trapped by Rocky Helmet. So creating those situations, those win-win situations, is really strong, and that's why I decided to go with Primarina here. Its stats are, granted, its stats are kind of low, but I think it was able to, perform sufficiently to what I wanted it to do. And yeah, I've used Primarina in previous, rule sets. I think it's a really reliable Pokemon. Unfortunately, it does not get recovery, but I decided to run Encore in the last move slot just because it can, potentially just lock out a game if it's against the last Pokemon on the opponent's team. And so just spamming Encore versus those Pokemon is really advantageous. There's pretty much no drawback. Encore is just very strong in the metagame, and previously I made videos talking about how Encore is really pretty much the best move in the game right now, just because in 3v3 you have less options to get around Encore in general. So and also the accessibility of this move has just gone over the roof. It's just gone over the edge in terms of how many Pokemon have access to this move, and so that's insane. Just how that this generation allowed that, to be honest. Like Dragonite and Counteract Shadow get Encore, so it just makes it really annoying to deal with. Like those Pokemon just become so much more threatening just because of Encore. It's insane. And then I ran Normal Terra just because of the Counteract Shadow stuff. Just because Counteract Shadow is the #1 used Pokemon currently in the metagame, and also just in general, Astro Barrage is very annoying to deal with. I decided to run Normal type because it can work well with Encore again, and Psychic Noise as well, because if I'm against like a Screens team, and their last Pokemon is Counteract Shadow, which usually carries, Astro Barrage and Draining Kiss, Encore plus Normal Terra plus Psychic Noise will block out that Counteract Shadow. And just because Normal Terra blocks out Astro Barrage, and then Psychic Noise blocks out Draining Kiss, so you can, these combined with Encore will, win you the game. There's nothing that it can do. And so that was a really cool tech that I kind of, thought was cool, but obviously this didn't actually come in, this actually didn't come into bite until I actually put it into practice, which is kind of funny. But that's actually a cool application of, the Psychic Noise, Liquid Voice stuff. But in general, very good. It has options to deal with Miraidon and Counteract Shadow. Now, granted, those Pokemon are very strong, so obviously it can still get broken through very easily. However, it has reliable options, and so for that reason, I decided to keep it on the team pretty much the entire time I was using the team, just because it, did what it needed to do. And so, yeah. And then the next Pokemon I ran was Chien-Pao with a Focus Sash, the classic Chien-Pao Focus Sash, The only thing that's unique about this is Taunt. I mean, just because of the Trick Room setups. Now, obviously, you see things like Necrozma Duskmane, Calyrex Ice Raider, and Mimikyu and things like that, which use Trick Room. And so Taunt was a very good way to prevent that. Just because a lot of Pokemon try to use Chien-Pao as setup fodder for Trick Room. And even with Terra, combined with Terra, if Chien-Pao is able to force Terra and block Trick Room, you just got to turn for free, and your advantage is just so much bigger now, because their opponent just revealed their options for free. And then, this also works against Gliscor as well, because Gliscor a lot of the time against Chien-Pao will use Toxic or Sub immediately, because protecting is risky against Chien-Pao, because a lot of Chien-Paos run Swords Dance, and so the only time Gliscor usually protects against Chien-Pao is when there's a Dondozo behind it. And so with that, you're kind of able to narrow down their options very easily and just kind of, prepare the match ahead of time. Just prepare ahead of time is really important. And Icicle Crash, obviously, that's the bread and butter of Chien-Pao, just outspeeding most opponents and threatening a flinch while also forcing a Terra is really, just so powerful. Sucker Punch is a really good option. Obviously, Taunt can guarantee Sucker Punches, which is kind of cool against certain Pokemon. Like, for example, the support Calyrex Shadows, which, can become very annoying. And then Sacred Sword is very strong against opponents Chien-Pao, Archuludon, which, it can ignore Stamina Defense boosts. And also Zamazenta, although I didn't really see that much Zamazenta in, the metagame in general, but it's very good against those Pokemon in general. And I used to run Brick Break, but I didn't really see, because Brick Break normally, I run it to get rid of screens, but a lot of screen teams were actually trying to take care of Brick Break by switching in Calyrex Shadow immediately, which is kind of crazy, but that's what a lot of them actually started doing. And so I thought Brick Break wasn't worth it anymore, and so I decided to run Sacred Sword just to prioritize the other matchups. And so it just give, higher general damage output is always good as well. And so, yeah, obviously, it gives more damage output against Steel Terra Gliscor and other Steel types, which is really important. And so, yeah, I thought this was really good. And Jolly Nature, obviously, to outspeed, try and outspeed the opponent's Chien-Paos and, Jolly Koraidons, Miraidons with Timid Nature and things like that. Now, obviously, I could lose a speed tie, but I think just running this was the best thing I could do to deal with the opponent's Chien-Paos, because Chien-Pao is just a very threatening Pokemon, and so I just wanted to have a Jelly Nature to be able to contest that Pokemon with my own Chien-Pao, because that thing is just, and especially against Miraidon plus Ho, Electric Terra Chien-Pao is very strong, and that's something I learned very quickly. So just having a faster champ out than that is usually really good because a lot of them are life orb, and so they usually go adamant nature. And so I decided to run jelly to try and outspeed the adamant ones that were running life orb, and so that was the concept there. And I'm just gonna go over the last two Pokemon very briefly, just because like these four Pokemon in the front were the main four I used in the battles, just because they were they had good compatibility with each other. However, the last two Pokemon were very good in their own way. So Scizor, starting with Scizor, this is a very unique Scizor, unusual Scizor set. It has Tailwind and Defog. So you're like, Val, why are you using these options? This is like terrible. But I assure you, they are actually very good options. Mainly just because of the compatibility with Ho-Oh as well. Because one, Defog gets rid of Stealth Rock, so getting rid of hazards is really good. And then Tailwind allows Ho-Oh to outspeed faster legendary Pokemon. And so by combining Tailwind with U-Turn, you can give Ho-Oh a couple turns of just free reign over the opponent. And also Bullet Punch is obviously really good on Scizor to deal with opponents' Shampoo and Fluttermane that cannot use Terra, which obviously is a very good finishing option. In case Ho-Oh dies, Bullet Punch can finish off the opponent. And so honestly, I think previously I tried other options such as knockoff or counter in the defog slot, but I feel like defog is just a very cool option, and it also removes screens, right? So removing screens allows Ho-Oh and Miraidon to function better because I don't have, like I said, since the opponent's players were, taking care of Break by switching into Ghost type immediately, such as Calyrex Shadow, I decided to find another, unforeseen option that's hidden from the opponent's point of view to deal with these screens. So that's why I decided to run Defog. And so by using Defog and then you turning out to one of these two legendaries, I could just pretty much KO the opponent's legendary that they were trying to set up the screens for. And so that was a really cool option that I really liked. And unfortunately, these moves aren't usable outside of that. But I think these situations come up to where if Scizor does need to be selected, it can do very well because it's, trained for these situations. And so that's why I decided to use it. And it's also a really good cushion against Zacians because a lot of Zacians just have so much coverage, but Scizor doesn't really, he gets super effectively hit by Zacian because very few of them run like a Fire Fang or a Fire move. So Scizor was just very good in that sense. So being very consistent defensive-wise was also a really good factor, especially against Chien-Pao as well, because Chien-Pao is just, like I said, Chien-Pao is a huge threat. And I decided to run, HP defense with the 4 attack adamant nature, which allows me to, Bullet Punch allows me to, kill those Fluttermanes, which is very important right there. And now I'm going to be talking about the last Pokemon on the team, which is Ursaluna Bloodmoon. So, I ran a Cobra Cloak on this because Miraidon plus Woe do not like dealing with Garganacl, right? So, Miraidon really does not like dealing with Grass Garganacl because it resists Electro Drift. And Ho does not like dealing with the Ghost one or the Water one. Or Fairy. So, Ursaluna Bloodmoon kind of served as a pivot option. Just like a option that can scout out the opponent's Garganacl, see what Terra it is. Because it was just really good. Because it could just, not care about Salt Cure. And then set up Calm Minds to deal with the defensive Poke structures behind Garg. And since a lot of Garganacls were paired with things like Eternatus, Ho-Oh, and other defensive Pokemon, this set was really effective. Now, one thing I considered was running Taunt in the Blood Moon slot, and it's something that I was actually kind of recommended, but I thought Blood Moon was just a very good general move against general teams, just because it can, for one, it can threaten a 1 KO on our Shifu Water with the Modest Nature. Modest Nature Blood Moon can kill a Shifu in one hit, which is very important because sometimes our Shifu is kind of paired with those defensive Pokemon. So I kind of, like, if I wasn't able to remove that immediately, it would be a huge problem. And so I decided to run that. And also just general high damage is really good. So that's why I decided to go with Blood Moon there. And then Hyper Voice is really good, which preventing the substitute stalling. So as you may know, Garganacl and things like Gliscor and other things like Eternatus run substitute sometimes, and they just try to stall out the match. And so Hyper Voice prevents that because it just hits you the substitute like it wasn't there. So That's really good. And then Calm Mind and Moonlight just to set up while being tanky. And the Ursulina Blood Moon I have here is a Poison Terra, which prevents Toxic. And it can also be used out later to remove Toxic Spikes, so that was really good. And obviously the UV spread here has a lot of bulk, so 252 HP, just to maximize that bulk, just maximize, you know, that tankiness, and then 84 defense, which, you know, allows it to live, I think it was Flare Blitz from Miraidon, like Terrifier Flare Blitz, if I recall correctly. And then 164, or I think this was like Banded Flare, I think it was Banded Flare Blitz, I'm not exactly sure, but it was just so long ago. But 164 special defense allows it to live the Cataract Shadow, I think it's Specs, is it? I think it's Grass Knot. I think it's Grass Knot. It lives Grass Knot. So it's just able to, you know, take those options from common Pokemon, and then Modest Nature allows it to retaliate with high damage. And also against Dondozo, the Blood Moon damage is really important because you don't want to give it fissure opportunities. Now, unfortunately, I did lose a few matches against Soul teams because of Dondozo hitting the fissure, but the main thing to understand is that Hyper Voice gives Dondozo one extra fissure opportunity, which is really, you don't want that. Like with Blood Moon and Hyper Voice, by using them after the other, Dondozo usually only has one chance to go for fissure, and Hyper Voice gives it two chances, and so that's the thing, because unfortunately that's how those teams try to win, or that's their win condition, right? So the goal is to prevent unnecessary exchanges in general, just unnecessary losses. And so that's another reason why I decided to run Blood Moon here. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the team I decided to use for Regulation I. I have built a few other teams just to try and, you know, sample out get a feel for the format and just kind of try to get some good results. But unfortunately, I did, have a lot of teams that did not perform well. And so it took me a while to conceive this team, but I think it really paid off just because, one, it fits my playstyle. So the offensive and, switching around the cycling was really good. Something I'm really good at, and I was able to capitalize on that playstyle with this team. And also it had Pokemon that I previously know how to, just use in general in competitive. The only Pokemon on this team that I haven't used before that were Ho and Miraidon, because these two are, I didn't use these, but the other Pokemon that weren't the legendaries, I've used these Pokemon in some capacity, so I do have to, I do how people play against them, I just do how to use them in general. So it really helped because I was able to really quickly get used to try to pilot this team to a higher level. And so yeah, that's pretty much it for this team, and I hope you guys enjoyed, all the content that I put out with this team. I might do a couple extra streams in the last week of August, trying to see what I can do for the last week of Regulation I. But yeah, that's pretty much my explanation for the team. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see y'all soon.